are those things that we can stop doing, take things out of your diet, and what are those things that need to be in your diet to heal and seal it? And so the image that I like to use is a brick wall. What makes a steady wall? So the bricks are the amino acids, which come from protein, and the mortar is the gelatin and the collagen. So in order to fix that leaky gut, we need to have good protein, good animal protein that provides the amino acids that we need, and we need to have stock, which provides the gelatin and the collagen to seal it all up, if that makes sense. You need the building blocks, and you need, what goes between the building blocks to actually get that thing healed and sealed. And you need to stop clobbering that wall with artillery, if you will, of all these foods that will aggravate and break through and work to keep those holes open.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We're your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey everybody, I'm Hilda Labrada Gore, and this is episode 164. My guest today is Monica Corrado. Leaky gut is becoming a buzzword everywhere lately, and for good reason. So many people are struggling with health conditions that didn't exist before, and much of it has to do with our compromised digestive systems. Today, Monica, a teaching chef, certified nutrition consultant, and certified GAPS practitioner, explains exactly what leaky gut is, how we can fix it, and basically heal and seal it for good. Along the way, you'll hear her passion, stories of people who have followed the GAPS protocol, that is the gut and psychology syndrome protocol for healing, and who found relief and health. Monica tells her own story as well. You will certainly be inspired to live differently as a result of this conversation, so stay tuned. Before we get into it, we want to recognize our sponsors. The Weston A. Price Foundation, of course, as always, we are dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the diet through education, research, and activism. Find out more by going to westonaprice.org. And Real Milk, nature's perfect food. Visit realmilk.com. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Monica.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here today. We really want to dive into this GAPS diet and how to heal our leaky guts and heal from the inside out. Let's kick things off by you telling us that story about that 4-year-old who you said had some kind of failure to thrive. Can you tell us that story?
Well, this is just a wonderful story. I had one phone call with a mom because I do private consultations over the phone. I had a phone call with the mom about her daughter, and she was a 4-year-old who was, quote unquote, failure to thrive. She was listless. She had no energy. She was throwing tantrums all the time. She had been just diagnosed with autism. So this was about probably 7 years ago, believe it or not. And the mom had heard about the GAPS diet, and she called me to say, what is this thing, and what can I do? Can I do anything? Well, do you think this will work? That was her question to me. Do you think this will work? And I said, I think it's worth a try because, it's working for many, many people. So let's talk about what you need to do. And so the mom took out, the usuals, the processed foods, the things with dyes. She was already 100% organic in her house in terms of food and buying, fresh local food and trying to feed that child well. And all she did, I said, listen, why don't you just try to put her on meat stock, take out all of the processed foods, et cetera, put her on meat stock, and just have her have really good high-fat diet. So I gave her some basic things to do. This was not like the big whole enchilada, if you will. It was not the whole GAPS diet that people freak about, just simple things. I didn't hear back from the mom until about a year later. I had one phone call with her. About a year later, she came to a class of mine, and she told the story of her daughter. She was talking to some of the other people in the class, and she said, my daughter used to be failure to thrive. She used to tell tantrums, and she was nonverbal. The parents used to hide under the covers almost in the morning waiting for the first scream. And that's all would happen with one big scream that would announce that this child was awake. In any case, so they were always kind of walking on eggshells and worried about the next tantrum. And she said within 2 weeks of just implementing some very simple things, mostly meat stock, some good, chicken and beef stock, this child, one day, they were waiting for the usual wake-up call. And instead of the usual wake-up call, the child crawled into bed with mommy and daddy and said, "I love you."
Wow.
I know, it still makes me cry.
Well, that's powerful.
Yeah, she told the story, and the mom kept at it, and the girl, her diagnosis got reversed. She's no longer on the autism spectrum. She is thriving. She is talking. She is head of her class in reading and math.
Oh my goodness.
Just tremendous. When you see that food, it wasn't a ton of supplements. It wasn't all these alternative therapies. It was literally, let's just get back to basic nourishing traditional food, specifically this meat stock. And there's that child. She has a whole new life now.
That is a powerful story. I'm so glad you told it. And I'm excited because the solution does not have to be complicated. We can get back to basics to nourish our children well. And our listeners right now might not have a child on the spectrum. They might just have a child with digestive issues, or they themselves might have digestive issues. So you're going to bring us all back to the basics. Isn't that right?
Yes. And, many, many people have children with something going on, even if it's just they're not focusing in school, really. All sorts of things from, autism is kind of the big one that has all the press right now, but there's so much other stuff going on that's totally connected to what we're eating and what we're not eating. A lot of it is what we're not eating. We're not eating good, nourishing, traditional foods. We're not eating beautiful pastured butter. We're not eating a lot of eggs. We're eating a lot of processed crap, pardon my language, that's not serving us or our children.
And you speak from the place of experience. Tell us how you got to this place of eating the right things and helping others do the same.
I was actually living right outside of Washington, D.C., and I was very involved with the biodynamic farm movement, and I was just trying to learn more about how to eat sustainably, how to eat local, etc. I had a catering company, and believe it or not, it was called The Basic Feast, and I really was searching for local, sustainable farms that I could work with. And this was way back, this was 2010. I just went searching and I found on the internet an article about the best tasting chicken in America. And it was on the cover of the Smithsonian magazine in July of 2010. There's Joel Salatin's farm, Polyface.
Oh.
So I just jumped on the phone and I said, "Can I come down and see the farm?" He's like, "Of course you could come. I'll take you on a tour." So that was the beginning of my connection with Polyface. And also I was part of one of the first CSAs in the DC metro area called Spiritual Food for the New Millennium. It's still running out of Bethesda. And it was connected with a biodynamic farm in Kimberton, Pennsylvania. It still is. We were getting raw milk from this Pennsylvania farm, biodynamic raw milk. And at the time, it was illegal in Maryland to have access to raw milk. And thank God now, with all the work of many people, including Sally Fallon and Liz Reitzig, et cetera, to get milk available in Maryland to people under pet food right now. But in any case, so Sally Fallon was part of my CSA. And so that's how I met her. She actually taught me how to make butter in the basement of this CSA one day. A bunch of us were like, we want to learn to make butter. And I got my first Nourishing Traditions cookbook. And I just started learning, teaching myself how to cook from this cookbook.
So Monica, what took you from that point, from understanding how to cook with real food and real ingredients, to the GAPS diet, which is where we want to take our listeners today? How did you get from point A to point B?
Sure. Someone asked me to teach, "Can you teach Nourishing Traditions?" I got this phone call. I said, sure, why not? So I created some classes and I started teaching. But how did I get to GAPS? Well, I went to one of the Wise Traditions conferences, one of the earlier ones, where Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride was asked to speak. It was the first time she spoke at Wise Traditions, and it was in Virginia. She was speaking on children and health. And this was a subject that always interested me. I had become a nutritional consultant, and I had been looking at what's going on with autism. What's going on with our children? Why are they so sick? What can we do about it? And what is the role of food? This was just something that was really rolling around in my mind. Literally, I sat in the back of that conference room. There were hundreds of people in that first talk that she gave. And I just wept as she spoke because I knew this was the answer. So I did that. And then what happened next was within about 3 months after I went to that lecture and was just blown away and bought the book and started reading the GAPS diet, the Gut and Psychology Syndrome diet book. I was teaching a class, and I had some students come up to me and say, a cooking class, come up to me and say, Monica, will you teach GAPS? Now, do you see a little deja vu here? So I said, sure, I could teach GAPS. Why not? Teach cooking for the GAPS diet. And so I studied that book. I read it backwards and forwards, 3-4 times. I created some cooking classes, the first cooking classes that were out there on GAPS. And, I just looked at the nuances. What are the differences here? What makes it GAPS versus Wise Traditions cooking? And I put together those cooking classes, and I'm still doing them today.
So let's talk about that, Monica. What are the differences between eating these whole, real, nourishing foods like the Wise Traditions diet recommends and the GAPS diet? Explain to us some of the differences.
Sure. This is a really important point here. So people who get GAPS and get Nourishing Traditions, Wise Traditions, the difference is that we call the Nourishing Traditions or Wise Traditions way of cooking and eating the well diet. The well diet, being well, it keeps you well. Certainly for many people, it heals. For sure, when they get off, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, and they just change to, eating this way, eating nourishing traditional foods, that they get well. Lots of symptoms disappear. We have hundreds of stories, thousands. How many stories? Lots of stories of that happening. We call the GAPS diet is a therapeutic diet. So it's a healing diet. And while the foundational points are common, they have foundation in common, which means you want the cleanest food you can find. You want things that are organic or sustainable, etc. So the best quality food you can find, that's the same. You want it prepared in traditional ways that make it easy to digest. So we're doing pre-digestion techniques, if you will. That's the same. When you get to the GAPS diet, this is, it's a healing diet. So there are nuances, but they really are a big deal in moving to a therapeutic level, to a healing level, to do that deep dish, leaky gut healing level. And I can go into more specifics if you like. Actually, I'm going to go right now into one specific, which is the difference between meat stock and bone broth.
Yeah, go for it.
I cannot stress how important this point is. In fact, it led me to writing an entire book about the difference because so many people were confused. People were trying to do the GAPS diet and heal their children's leaky guts and their own leaky guts. And, they were off making bone broth, which in the cookbook Nourishing Traditions is called stock, right? So it's literally what Sally's teaching in that book is bone broth. It's broth made by a lot of bones and a little bit of meat. And what Dr. Natasha was teaching was meat stock, which is a lot of meat and a little bit of bone. And people think that that's not a big difference, but what happens is that long cooked bone broth can and does produce high levels of glutamic acid. And glutamic acid is very, very similar in structure to glutamate, which should kind of ring a bell for people. Monosodium glutamate, MSG, is an excitotoxin.
Right.
Trigger nervous system symptoms, including seizures in the brain. So when you have people who already have brain function issues or symptoms or challenges, however you'd like to say that, one does not want to be giving them long cooked bone broth because you can trigger those symptoms, including if they're already prone to them, these seizures. Okay, so I heard that all these moms, I was on these chat groups of moms who were trying to force their children to drink bone broth, and the children didn't want it. And you know why? Because the children knew at some level that this is not good for me. So when I saw that happening, I thought, oh yeah, I just have to write the book. That was the first book of my 4-book series on cooking techniques for the GAPS diet. And I've spent the last, I don't know how many years trying to get this particular point made, because it's very, very important. You know, bone broth is taken off like a rocket. We've got people with all their like bone broth, dehydrated bone broth, and bone broth in a jar and bone broth in a can, and drink your bone broth. And that's fine if you are well. You see, if you're not well and you have any of the symptoms that are connected to leaky gut, including autoimmune disorders, including seasonal allergies, including food allergies, including brain fog, including all of those things, if you're depressed, if you've got mood swings, you've got to heal that leaky gut. And bone broth is not the answer. It's got to be meat stock, or you'll just have more aggravated symptoms.
Well, that is an important distinction, Monica, and we will make sure to put a link in our show notes to these books that you've written that may be of help to people. And I'm also glad a moment ago that you were specific when you referred to the GAPS diet as the gut and psychology syndrome. That's really important for folks to know, that this is a link that Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride has pointed to between our overall health and what's happening in our guts.
Yes, and she has said it for many, many years. And that's why I've decided, I've told her this, I've started to call her diet the original Heal Your Leaky Gut diet, because she's been talking about healing a leaky gut, and now it's become quite the thing, and people are out there going, oh, at least leaky gut is becoming a term that, they may even have on the network news, leaky gut is attached to this, and there's lots of science behind it. But hers is really the original. If you heal what's going on in the small intestine of, the duodenum of the small intestine, and I can go way into that if you're interested or not, but you must heal that specific part of the small intestine. And that means that you have to take certain things out of your diet and put certain things into your diet in order to do that. And you need to do it for usually we're seeing at least 2 years. It's a 2-year effort. But it's easy, and that's what I try to do, is make it easy for people.
Coming up, Monica explains exactly what leaky gut is, what causes it, how it affects our health, and how to fix it. We will also learn together what specific foods to add to our diet and which ones to avoid in order to rebuild, heal, and seal the gut for better health.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
The Weston A. Price Foundation. Are you confused about nutrition? The Weston A. Price Foundation sets the record straight. Find out why butter is a health food, why soy foods are not your friend, and why optimal health is found in the wise traditions of our ancestors. Go to westonaprice.org. And Real Milk, pasture-fed, unprocessed, full-fat, nature's perfect food. Find out about the benefits of real raw milk and where you can obtain it at realmilk.com. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Monica, can you define the term leaky gut for us, and also give us some of the science behind what's going on there?
So people say, all right, so what part of my gut is leaking? What are you talking about? What? And so I'm happy to do that. So the part of your GUT, your gut, that's leaking is your small intestine, specifically the first part of your small intestine that's called the duodenum. And the duodenum is the part that the stomach empties into. Okay, so the duodenum of the small intestine is the part of your gut that we're talking about when people say leaky gut. Nothing else. You got a big, long alimentary canal, but we're talking about that part of it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that there are holes in that area of the small intestine. And so molecules that should never get into the bloodstream get into the bloodstream. And so that's your duodenum has holes in it and is allowing large molecules to leak into the bloodstream. I always kind of see things in pictures. I can see like my brain going off, going, emergency, emergency. That's emergency. When you get large protein molecules, what we call foreign proteins in the blood, it's an emergency that causes an autoimmune. First, it's an immune system reaction, and then it can build to be an autoimmune reaction. So things like toxins get in there, get into the bloodstream. The bloodstream's not supposed to have all this, I want to say trash, I'll say that, in it. It's not supposed to have big toxins in it. It's not supposed to have these large protein molecules in it. Your leaky gut is your duodenum that has holes in it that is allowing large molecules into the bloodstream, and that causes your immune system to be on high alert.
But where did those holes come from?
Well, some of the things that are causal are eating foods, specifically grains, I'll just say it, eating grains, specifically wheat, and other grains that are not prepared correctly too early for the body to handle it. So things like cereal given to babies before they have all 4 back molars, that's going to cause some real digestive distress, kind of like sandpaper on their little digestive systems that cannot break them down. So prescription drug use, long-term prescription drug use is part of it. Steroids, of course, being on steroids. How about antibiotics? Lots of antibiotic use, vaccinations, all of these things, then let's just say genetically modified organisms, GMOs, eating them. There's a whole list of things. That's like kind of the things that we do. And then the other thing is, what are we eating? Are we eating enough collagen? Are we eating enough of the things that make that strong? The protein, the collagen, the gelatin, those types of things to make sure that that all of our cells are strong.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, you think in terms of word pictures and images, and so do I, Monica. And I was thinking, what about a soldier on a battlefield who literally has a hole in his gut? We can speculate as to whether it was a cannon that caused the damage or a rifle, but at the end of the day, what we need to do is tend to that wound and heal it, and we can worry about the cause of it later. So I'm really glad you're giving us some practical ideas on how to strengthen our bodies, because we really want our children to have minds and bodies that are functioning optimally. I mean, we want that for ourselves as well.
So that's what I'm trying to say. Everybody, this is what we need to do to heal, because we must, because if we do not continue, if we don't heal, the stakes are just too high at this point. Autoimmune diseases, I think there's more than 85 listed on the web as a confirmed autoimmune disease at this point. It's just growing and growing and growing. And that is directly connected to what's going on with the gut lining. It's just amazing to me. But So what I like to do with people is just talk about what are those things that we can stop doing, take things out of your diet, and what are those things that need to be in your diet to heal and seal it. And here we go with that image. So the image that I like to use is a brick wall. So you have bricks and you have mortar. What makes a steady wall? So the bricks are the amino acids, which come from protein, and the mortar is the gelatin and the collagen. So in order to fix that leaky gut, we need to have good protein, good animal protein that provides the amino acids that we need. And we need to have, stock, which provides the gelatin and the collagen to seal it all up, if that makes sense. You need the building blocks, and you need, what goes between the building blocks to actually get that thing healed and sealed. And you need to stop clobbering that wall with artillery, if you will, of all these foods that will aggravate and break through and work to keep those holes open.
So can you give us some specifics, Monica? Which are the foods that build and which are the ones that break down the gut wall?
Sure. So the building and the breaking down. So the building is, again, is meat stock. It's stock that's short cooked. It's kind of like what your grandmother used to do when she put a chicken in the pot with some water and veggies and she cooked it and gave it to you for dinner. That's meat stock. It's not a big deal. It's a one pot meal. It's in a pot. It's dinner. So those are the types of things. That's really the number one thing that's going to heal and seal that gut is meat stock. And then what do you need to not be eating? Well, for a long period of time, we need to take out those molecules that are too big. Let me back up one moment and just say that part of the function of that area of your small intestine is to break down your food into these small molecules that the body can then absorb and use. If you've got holes in that area, you don't have the ability to break down or digest your food. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to keep those long chain, either complex proteins, complex carbohydrates. Did you hear that? Carbohydrates, yes. Those complex carbohydrates need to stay out until we've healed and sealed. And so what are those things? They are all your grains, all of your grains. Gluten-free, with gluten, doesn't matter. Gluten, grain. Your grains have to stay out because they're too big and they will break through that very weak, intestinal wall that has holes in it. So grains really need to stay out. Processed foods, God help us, need to stay out. Certainly all of those other things that everyone else is talking about, no dyes, no food colorings, sugar of any kind is out because sugar feeds pathogens, and pathogens are the other part of this program. We need to heal and seal, but we also need to get those pathogenic bacteria down. So people are talking again about your microbiome. That's a buzzword too. And so we need to be looking at that part also. So the foods that stay out really are, all grains, all starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, fiber stays out for a little while because you just don't want to have sandpaper on an open wound.
Right. Well, Monica, this has been super inspiring. Could you tell us one more story of someone who's healed from the traditional foods or even the GAPS diet?
So I started teaching these wonderful cooking classes, these traditional food cooking classes in the DC metro area. I was all over, teaching in Falls Church and teaching in DC and Alexandria, Arlington, Bethesda, everywhere, because I was just trying to get the word out that you can be well through food. You can, it's possible. I had this lovely gal who was in her 60s at the time, and this was about 10 years ago. And she would follow me around to these classes and take every class I taught. She took the one on lactofermentation. She took the one on how to make greens, the one on, stocks and broths, how to culture dairy. She took everything. She came to all these classes, and she finally came up to me at one point, and I said, "What are you doing? You're like my groupie, kind of, like you follow me around all over Northern Virginia." She said, the doctors have me on all this medication for diabetes and heart and all sorts of other things, and I am sick and tired of taking pills. And I told them that I'm going to just stop and I'm going to eat real food and I'm going to get better. I'm like, I'm like, okay. Of course, I want her off her meds and to be well. And, you don't want to do it all at one time, perhaps shock the body. But she really did it. She went off all of her medication. She lost, 10, 15 pounds that she had been carrying because she was eating a processed food, high carb, lots of processed carb diet, no fat, because you can't do that. And she changed to, nourishing traditional foods, and she's off her meds and happier than a clam at high tide. And so no more diabetes, no more heart issues, eating good pastured eggs and cultured butter and her stock and everything else. And she's just a love. I'm thrilled, So those are, it didn't have to be the GAPS diet for her. It was just switching to, nourishing traditional foods that are made with love at home in your own kitchen, by your own hands, and doing these traditional cooking techniques, sprouting and soaking and fermenting and, that our grandmothers and great grandmothers did, that were just the way it was, the way we ate. and she's doing very, very well, and we're still friends on Facebook.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. And it must be so gratifying for you, Monica, to see people roll up their sleeves and learn some of these traditional cooking and food preparation techniques and have their lives changed, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. It is why I do what I do. It is what keeps me going, keeps me teaching and trying to spread the good word of get back in the kitchen. And it can be easy, fun, and certainly deeply, deeply nourishing.
Absolutely. So Monica, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
One thing, boy, you're tough, Hilda. Cook your own food. There, done. Cook your own food with no microwaves. I could tell you so many other things and make sure it's organic but really it's about connect with your food, find out where it comes from. Try a new recipe.
That is great advice, Monica. You are not the only one. Michael Pollan and Joel Salatin, Sally Fallon Morell, of course, they're all saying, let's get reacquainted with our kitchen and with our food, and our health will be transformed.
Yes, and so, absolutely. So that leads me to my other piece, which we didn't talk about, which is I teach people how to cook. So that's my Cooking for Wellbeing teacher training program. If anybody, it's just because I can't be everywhere all the time.
No.
And so I'm trying to teach people how to cook, and then I teach them how to teach people how to cook. So this is, if anybody's interested in that, join the cadre of teachers of traditional food, and let's get these people the tools and the knowledge they need to get back in the kitchen with ease.
Well, we will make sure to let people know where they can find you, Monica, because we have listeners who run the gamut, some who just really want to reacquaint themselves with their own kitchens and foods, and others who want to help others. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful we had this time together, and I'll see you at the conference in November.
Yes, thank you so much, Hilda, and thank you for all the good work you're doing getting this information out. You're helping change that world one podcast at a time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you. Okay, be well.
My guest today was Monica Corrado. Visit her website, simplybeingwell.com. And for highlights from today's show, including resources we mentioned, simply go to the westonaprice.org website, go to the podcast page, and look for the show notes for episode 164. Once you're there, you'll see our listener survey. It's not too late. We would love to hear from you. We want to know more about who you are so we can better serve you. So take a moment and fill it out for us. We'd appreciate it so much. And go ahead and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a thing. You can also rate and review us on iTunes. We read every single one, and it means a lot to us. So thanks again in advance. One more cool thing, this podcast is now available, everybody, through Pandora. Their new podcast genome project makes podcast recommendations, and you can listen to podcasts through Pandora. So it's one more way to access this information. Tell your friends and enjoy it. Next week, my guest is Leslie Manukian. The big question as winter approaches for many of us is whether we should bother with a flu shot. Some say it's critical to protect us from virulent strains of flu that could damage our health or even cause death. Others say the flu shot is not as effective as we've been led to believe. Leslie helps us examine the facts closely and get to the truth of the matter, so you won't want to miss that episode. Now, a quick thank you to the podcast production team. Assistants include Cassie Reef, Diva Risby, Melanie Ahern, and Ari O'Hara. Cheryl Huftelin helps with social media. Mary Hine, Olga de Villiers, and Joy de los Santos boost sponsorship and help with special projects. Our listening team includes Heather Carpentier and Victor Cosetto, and Amy Matias helps with transcriptions. Music is from Michelle Bloom's CD Big Backyard, specifically the track called Sunny Side Up. Find her music at allthingsbloom.com. So that's it. Let's keep in touch, everybody. I'm on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. Follow me for health tips, podcast stuff, behind the scenes on the show, and me. Thanks, and see you soon.
Thanks for listening today. We have all kinds of resources to support you on your health journey. On the Weston A. Price Foundation website, you'll find podcasts, blogs, articles, and brochures related to just about any health topic you can imagine. You can also find a local chapter to help you discover sources of real, organic food in your area. And you can become a member to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism. Visit westonaprice.org for all this and more. And remember that the Wise Traditions podcast is available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.